Hello, lovelies. Come on in. Come on in. We are journeying through God's Word today. We're in Genesis. We're on Genesis 29. I've got my notes. I've got my Bible. I've got some extra texts we're going to look at today. And I've got my tea. So let's just dive in. Verse 1. This is the continuation of Jacob's journey. Jacob then continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from the well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep, and they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. I just want to give you some history or some context, cultural context around this well. So Old Testament history, page 87. There we go. Over most of the cisterns, so keep in mind this is desert. Over most of the cisterns lay a broad and thick flat stone with a round hole cut in the middle, forming the mouth of the cistern. This hole, in many cases, was covered with a heavy stone, which usually required 2 or 3 men to roll away. So that gives you kind of a visual. I want to read from Ellicott's to give us even more on this. The region around Haran, though fertile, was very dry, and the chief use of the stone was to prevent the well from being choked with sand. Besides this, the stone may have marked that the well was private property, for as we have seen in the account of the covenants of Abraham and Isaac with Abimelech, no possession was more valued than that of well. It is probable that Laban had at least a first claim upon the water. And so there's a couple of reasons that these shepherds are waiting. One is that if Laban has first rights to the well, they need to wait for Rachel to arrive. And secondly, they needed more than one person to roll the stone away. So this is why he finds the shepherds waiting in this area, not doing anything. They're waiting for the stone to move so that they may water their sheep. Verse 4. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" And "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. And then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said, "and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It's not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to the pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. That's when we water the sheep." So Jacob is very knowledgeable about flocks and how this should be, and he's confused why they're there just sitting there doing nothing. So he's trying to give them direction. And Jacob's knowledge about sheep is going to come in very handy. We're going to see that in just a minute. But verse 8, "We can't," they replied. Verse 9, "While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess." It was very common back then for women and men to look after sheep. This was not uncommon. "And when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep." Now, I want you to keep in mind, we just found out this stone requires 2 or 3 men to move it. This is literally Jacob and testosterone showing off for a girl, just in case you hadn't picked up on that. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him, embraced him, kissed him, and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all the things, and Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." So we've got so far in this story, Jacob has his mind settled. His mother sent him for a wife, and so he's got his eyes like, who do I pick? And he finds out that Rachel is one of the daughters he's supposed to be aiming for, right? That his father told him. go find a daughter of Laban. He's found a daughter of Laban, and she's pretty. He's like, okay, this is where I'm going. This is my intent. I'm going to marry this girl. And he is set in his ways. Mind you, we notice that God has not said anything to Jacob here yet. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. Now, Laban didn't fully show his stripes in our last story, where a wife is found for Isaac. But Laban has possibly figured out that through all the stories that Jacob has told him, that Abraham has grown in value. Isaac has grown in value. Jacob must come from money. Now, Jacob doesn't arrive with money, but he must come from money. And so Laban is like, how can I insert myself and, obtain some of these treasures? Also, he has had an opportunity to see Jacob with the flocks, and his knowledge of the flocks has shown to be very beneficial to Laban. So Laban wants him to kind of stick around. So he rather craftily tries to put this back on Jacob and looks for him to come up with a wage. Now, keep in mind, Jacob's goal here is Rachel. This is all that's on his mind. I want to pull from Old Testament Bible history here. And I hope you're seeing how beneficial these commentaries can be when you're studying through the Word. You don't have to have the same ones that I have, but to have a commentary with you when you're reading through will add to your understanding of what is being said. It'll add the cultural and a language perspective that allow you to understand what God is trying to say. Okay. A month's trial more than confirmed in the mind of that selfish, covetous man the favorable impression of Jacob's possible use to him as a shepherd, which his first energetic interference at the well must have produced. So Jacob is continuing to give advice to the shepherds, like we saw in the last story, and this is proving to Laban how valuable Jacob is, and he wants to utilize his skills and possibly his blessing. He's maybe seeing some increase from the work that Jacob has done. Okay, I want to come back to that for just a second. Jacob is going to suggest 7 years. We're going to see that in just a second. But I want to give you the sort of context behind that. The 7 years was the period during which among the Hebrews a Jewish slave had to serve. So in short, Jacob proposed becoming a bondsman for Rachel. Jacob situates himself or considers himself a slave. He wants to ingratiate himself into Laban's life and be so valuable to him. And so he submits to this 7 years. I want to suggest there's another possibility for the 7 years, though I think the 7-year significance is stated well here. I think it's very possible that Rachel's quite young at this point in time, because we have her, that's not a definitive, but I think it's possible she's quite young in this story. And so the 7 years may indicate sort of a time for Rachel to grow up in as well. So I just want to throw that out as a possibility. Okay, so Laban has suggested, what should your wages be? Verse 16, now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leigh, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leigh had weak eyes. It's probably she just needed glasses, but glasses weren't there. So she would have had difficulty seeing, which is probably why Rachel is doing the flocks and not Leigh. But Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Again, we go back to that God is not going to choose the mother to the line of the Messiah based on what man thinks, based on man's criteria. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Now, keep in mind that Jacob hasn't asked the Lord, hasn't prayed, nothing. He is just, she's pretty, I want her, and he's willing to wait for her, which again, maybe lends to the fact that Rachel is a little younger here. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than some other man. Stay here with me. And so Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob says to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed and I want to lie with her. Now we have sort of Jacob's lying is going to come back and haunt him. Verse 22, so Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leigh and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her, and Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. Now, we're going to get into this in just a few chapters, but Leigh becomes the mother to this covenant. Leigh becomes the mother to the line of the Messiah. Leigh was ultimately God's choice. Again, not a choice that man would have chosen, not a choice based on her morality, because she is a part of this deception in Jacob, but because God selected her. So again, we see this same process in the mothers to the covenant as we see in the fathers. And the reference here to Zilpah is Zilpah's going to come up in a story very shortly, so they're mentioning how she comes into the story here. And what we've got is that now the supplanter, if you've ever heard that, that's sort of the name, the meaning behind the name of Jacob. It means a deceiver, someone who takes something that isn't his. The supplanter is now supplanted. So he has now been deceived in the exact same way that he deceived his father. Do you see the connection? So Leigh is brought into the marriage bed with a veil on, which was very custom, would have been extremely appropriate. The two girls are sisters, so they're going to sound very similar. And she's brought in very much the same as how Jacob deceives his own father with the goat's hair and, trying to disguise his voice, all these things. He is now deceived in the exact same way. So if you ever have thought, why didn't Jacob pay for the sin that he did with his father? He does right here. This is it. This is God's response to Jacob's deceitfulness. But we also want to keep in mind that Leigh was ultimately God's choice. Jacob has a moment here where he can make a decision. He can choose to stay with Leigh, who will ultimately give birth to the line to the Messiah. Or he can ignore that God has sort of designed all this. And he can continue to pursue what he wants, like where his eyes have always been. But keep in mind that Leigh was also a part of the deception. This may account for Jacob's distrust and lack of affection for Leigh that we're going to see coming up. So, it would have been difficult for Jacob to trust her after this moment. Okay, so now we're at this place, this fork in the road, and Jacob can choose to submit to Leigh, or he can continue down on his own road. Verse 25, when morning came, there was Leigh. There's even an exclamation mark in my Bible. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you've done for me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? And Laban replied, it is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bride a week, and then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. Now Laban is relying on what was a custom at the time, that the older sister had to be married before the younger sister. However, there was also a custom that when cousins married, they married in their birth order. So Jacob actually had, in that sort of custom, Jacob would have had rights to Rachel because he was second born. And so he would have had rights to the second born Rachel. So although Laban is giving an excuse here, it's not a very good excuse. He is sort of twisting things to make it seem like he had no choice, but he ultimately deceived Jacob very severely. Verse 27, finish this daughter's bridal week, and then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. Now, he's not going to make Jacob work another 7 years and then get Rachel, but this 7 days is significant because at the custom at that time, weddings lasted 7 days. It was during this time that the marriage was to be consummated. It's like a honeymoon, this 7 days. And if Jacob interrupts that 7 days, he has offended Leigh, to just basically disgraced her. And so the 7 days are significant, but also Laban doesn't want to stretch it longer because he's worried Jacob's just going to go, I'm out of here, right? So he wants to make it short enough to appease Jacob, but long enough that Leigh is not disgraced in this process. And so Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leigh, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Again, this was never God's intent. God's intent is for one man, one woman. And so God's original design was that Isaac would be with Leigh. And Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel. Bilhah's going to come up, so that's why they're introducing her here, as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leigh, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. So Jacob has made his choice. He is going to continue to pursue Rachel, and he makes it very obvious in his household that he loves Rachel more. Now, he has gone against what Jacob already knows was God's original plan, was that it was one man, one woman. He knows the disaster that happened in his grandfather's life when another woman was introduced. He has all the background to make the right choice here, but he has eyes only for Rachel. This choice, this diversion from God's plan, this diversion from one man, one woman, is literally going to cause generations of strife. And I would bet that many times Jacob was telling his sons, don't marry more than one woman. Don't marry more than one woman. Because we are headed into soap opera level drama in the next few chapters, just because Jacob decides to go his own way. Verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leigh was not loved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Again, God is working on the line to the Messiah. That is the focus. He's also wanting to show that he is in control of the conception that's going to happen in this marriage. Leigh became pregnant, gave birth to a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, it is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. She conceived again, and then she gave birth to a son, and she said, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons, and she named him Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. And so she named him Judah, and she stopped having children. Now, there is a lot of significance coming up in the story of Jacob. Jacob is ultimately going to have 12 sons through 4 women. These 12 sons are going to be the 12 tribes of Israel, and we are going to hear about them for the remainder of the Old Testament. These lines from these sons become very significant. They each carry their own birthright, their own blessing, their own prophecies, and so we are building very significant history at this time. I want to walk you through each of these sons and what the Lord is doing in this process, because we talked about the Lord is not going to choose as man would choose. So God does not choose the firstborn. In fact, he doesn't choose the second or the thirdborn. It's the fourth, Judah, that God chooses. So I want to back up and walk you through this whole process so you understand that God is now working in Leigh's life to be the mother of the covenant. So in Bible history, Old Testament, we're going to read it, get into some more depth on these sons. Okay, Leigh bore in rapid succession 4 sons who she significantly named Reuben, which means behold a son, saying, surely Jehovah hath looked upon my affliction. Simeon means hearing, because Jehovah hath heard that I was hated. And Levi means joining or cleaving, in the hope that now this time my husband will cleave to me. And Judah, which means which means praised be Jehovah, since she said, now I will praise Jehovah. It deserves special note that in the birth of at least 3 of these sons, Leigh not only recognized God, but specially acknowledged him as Jehovah, the covenant God. From the beginning, Leigh is following and serving the God Jehovah, even though at first her thoughts about Jacob and her sons are more directed towards herself. She is, from the very beginning, praising and thanking Jehovah God for this. This is the woman that Leigh is. She is a daughter of the living God. She follows Jehovah God very closely. We're going to find out more about Rachel as we go through, and we're going to find out that Rachel is not the same woman. And she definitely does not follow Jehovah God. So we can look at this and go, oh, Lord, I see now you had chosen Leigh from the beginning. And if Jacob had settled in or even asked your opinion, you would have shown him that Leigh was the perfect choice as the mother of the covenant. However, he does not. We're going to see that in the next chapter, and life gets very rocky for Jacob. But I'm just giving you the peek ahead when I say that Judah becomes the line to the Messiah. We don't know that just yet, but I want you to see the progression here for Leigh as she begins to develop and deepen her own relationship with God. And it is finally with Judah that she says, I'm not even looking for my husband's approval anymore. I will praise the Lord. He is my God. And it is this child who becomes Judah, the praise of Jehovah, the line to the Messiah. So much significance going on in this story. And we can see, beginning to see how Jacob's detour from what God's original plan was is not going to continue the line to the Messiah. And we see that the covenant actually flows through Leigh. So God was preparing the mothers as much as the fathers. I hope you've gotten a lot out of these last few chapters, this story of Jacob. God has so much more in mind for Jacob because Jacob is not there yet. Though we see at the tail end of this chapter that Leigh is getting there. She's not perfect. We're going to see her slip up too. But God is going to perfect their faiths in order that they are worthy of the covenant flowing down from them. But ultimately, all of Jacob's sons are going to become the covenant promise of God. They will be the 12 tribes of Israel. So, very significant history beginning to happen here. And we see, we're going to see so much more as this unfolds. Chapter 30, we're going to go into Rachel's story a bit more in it. And I think you're going to be able to see, although Rachel was lovely and beautiful in form, that was not what was in her heart. So I'm going to pray us out as we go. I hope this has blessed you because it blesses me to dive into this, and I learn so much more every time I get into it. Father God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for just the wisdom to be able to go back and see your plan in action, to see your plan unfold in the Old Testament. How with backwards vision, 2020 vision, we can look back and see what Jacob would not have seen. We can see your plan from the beginning and how you crafted and molded Leigh to become the mother that you needed her to be the covenant mother. I pray, Lord, that you would do that in my life. I pray that as a mother, you would help me become deeper and deeper into you so that my eyes are for you only, that my thoughts are to you continually, that my prayers are unceasing. Lord, that you would continue to craft me as a mother worthy of the covenant that I'm going to pass down to my children. Lord, this covenant of loving you. Teach me how to teach them about who you are. In a world that defies who you are, give me the words to speak to them. But also, Lord, remind me to pray, to be in this place with you where we reason together over the lives of my children. I thank you so much for this opportunity. I pray that you would bless families as they go and just return us back together as we continue to dive through your word in Genesis. And I pray all this in Jesus' precious name. God bless.